Welcome to Innovating Music, a podcast from the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Gigi Johnson. Gary Young is growing in a growing business. As streaming is growing, Royalty Exchange is helping artists and other folks who've got intellectual property bring the money in now, matching by auction, buyers and sellers. We'll tell you about it as we go through the podcast. But it's interesting is who can grow as streaming grows. And Gary shows us how new businesses are coming in and can come in that will help us make this business make even more sense in the future.
Intellectual property is, at least in the United States, a legal monopoly on an idea or a sound or a song, that sort of thing. So think copyrights for music or copyrights for books or patents on a drug, that sort of thing.
So it's not just music. It is anything that is somebody's thought that has been officially registered. Do they have to have filed a copyright? And is it just U.S.?
It's not just U.S. And generally the criteria that we look for is it earning royalties, that intellectual property? And I have a feeling you're going to ask me what royalties are, so we can walk through those too.
Well, part of it is people have an assumption of what royalties are, but they may not know what royalties are.
Totally. I think there's a lot of people that assume they know what it means, and I think you're absolutely right. So royalties is basically a payment that you receive when someone uses your intellectual property. It's cut off the top. It's one of those things where if someone wants to use it or buy it or stream it, all those sorts of things, especially in the context of music, you're going to get paid a royalty if you're the songwriter or the artist or the producer, the label, or the publisher.
So it's not necessarily, but it might include a fee you get paid up front for something that you might get your royalties advanced, but this is really an opportunity because some come in over time?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. Yes, so I think it's a time value of money calculation in many instances where someone, say a songwriter, has written a hit song. They're making money every time it plays on the radio, every time you stream it on Spotify. But they want to put in a new home studio, and they know they're going to get paid for that song for a long time. What we do is we connect them with private investors who want to buy a piece of those future royalties, and then we facilitate that transaction happening.
How the heck did you get into this?
Good question. One of my partners, Jeff, actually found Royalty Exchange, the business, and he was interested in it from a financial standpoint as an investor to buy these types of things. Over the course of a few months following the site, he got the opportunity to acquire the business from the guys who started it, and that's what we did. And that was October 2015, roughly. So actually don't come from the music industry at all.
You don't come from music. What do you come from?
So this is my second company. The first company was a software as a service marketing analytics platform, so much more boring than this. And then before that, I wrote advertisements for a couple different companies. I was a copywriter.
It's interesting. So about half the people we've had on this podcast, which is about music and innovation, don't come from music, but come from other areas where they've been dealing with different types of innovations and have come into music. But so you have a perspective of not just looking at the music world, but looking at other technology spaces.
Mm-hmm.
What brings you into being in these innovative spaces in both music and other technologies?
I think in many instances it's looking for a problem to solve and a way that you can create value for people. I think for what we're doing at Royalty Exchange, it's one of those situations where there's some sources of financing of capital for rights holders, but I think bringing more money into the music industry drives higher prices, better deals for rights holders. So I think that's interesting. And then on the investor side, not to get too wonky finance-wise, but there is, in the world of September 2017, there is huge demand in the market for assets that produce income. Basically, since the financial crisis, interest rates have been effectively zero or very, very low. And what that means is that people that are putting money away and trying to earn interest payments, income, yield, whether it's in retirement or to fund their lifestyle, there's just not that many options out there. Royalty Exchange on the buyer side solves that problem by providing those folks with music catalogs or songs that have a track record of producing income that they can add to their portfolio.
So it's something that is an asset class that's also not correlated with the results of the stock market as well.
Exactly right. And that's one of the other things that people really like about it is a catalog earns based on the popularity of the artist and the usage. It doesn't matter if credit default swaps are blowing up the financial markets. People still listen to music and those things still pay.
And is this? I'm going to get a little wonky on my side. As some people
Let's do
know,
it.
I'm a 10-year banker before and was doing a whole bunch of financial structures. So this stuff is an artist would come in, or an author, or other folks that have a whole stream of rights coming in, and they would then be match made with an investor who might be just wanting this to come in as a nice stream of revenue. Is it that also it gets created into a portfolio with other artists' work, so someone's getting a stream of multiple types of things? Or are you guys packaging so that a lot of different people are able to diversify what they're doing? Or is it more of a matchmaking type role?
It's a little bit of both. The big thing is, so we run auctions. So the way we do matchmaking is we match up the rights holder with whoever will pay the highest price for their catalog. And we do that via traditional online auction. We like that because, one, it introduces competition into the market, which I think is important because, in the past, catalogs were bought and sold, but generally this was done in backroom deals where maybe there was one or two buyers and we're bringing 20,000 plus buyers to the space. But I think so there's that competition piece, and then the transparency of having the auctions online is important. And then I think when it comes to packaging these things, we haven't done that yet. So every deal that we do on our site has one buyer and one seller.
So no tranching or creating sort of different risk profiles or debt type structures or all sorts of fun stuff like that.
Yeah, not yet. I mean, we've stuck to the asset sale only.
Okay.
And so a lot of the investors on our site are interested in them because of how long these assets can pay royalties for, too. So they're looking at it from a much longer time frame than a lot of folks that are investing today.
So could our listeners be able to buy, or do they have to be qualified investors, which is of a certain asset level?
Yeah, so because it's asset sales, there's no requirement for investors to be accredited or qualified. Mm-hmm. The big thing is just the size of our deals tend to mean that most of the investors on our site are accredited.
What are the size of the deals?
Average, I haven't looked at this in a while, but the average deal size is about $55,000.
Interesting. And it's such an interesting time to be doing this, at least on the music side, as now we've got so many, I was going to say streams of revenue, but streams being the operative word there, with the flow increasing extensively. How does this work with you guys taking a look at a changing music industry and how the music side of this business has been changing or growing for you?
The way I think about it is 2015 was the first time the music industry grew in like 20 years, right? And now we're September 2017. And I view this as the beginning of a big and long period of sustained growth. growth for the industry.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a period post Napster, iTunes, where there was this kind of battle between physical, digital downloads, that sort of thing, and the streaming, at least to me, seems as though it's an ideal business model in a world where there's no real additional cost to distribute content. I think the industry is entering into this growth phase, or it's already really started, but I think it'll accelerate as more people adopt streaming.
So is the time good because there's a much bigger volume of prospective money that people would like to monetize now, or that there's also a lot more data for predictability of the flows? I mean, are you essentially only having people bid on known streams, or is it the fact that I'm an artist, I have this track out, and we don't know what the incoming streams will be definitively, we just know it's on a growth trajectory and somebody is buying that ride?
Yeah. So most of the stuff we do is streams that are proven and have a track record. In fact, 95%. And so we do that because the investors on our site, meaning the buyers in the auction or bidders in the auction, are looking not necessarily to speculate, but to buy a stream of income that they can model out how much it's earning, how much they expect it to earn in the future. And I think 10 years ago, doing that would have been very difficult, but I think the industry has taken some steps that really improve the quality of the data. And I think there's a lot of room to improve there, and we could definitely talk about that. But I think that combination of data plus more and more streams coming online makes it pretty exciting.
So what data, we've had a lot of data folks on this show already talking about innovation as to analytical information or be able to do predicting what could be happening with bands and fans in the future. What data are your buyers using and have access to?
On our site, with each auction that we put up, we provide a lot of data because we do the due diligence on the asset. Let's say, for example, that we're talking about a songwriter's share from ASCAP of one song, just to keep it fairly simple. What we do is we provide the historical earnings data for that song, which includes where it was played, what medium it was played on, what's the name of the song, were there any remixes, compilations, that sort of stuff. And so all of that is going into the listings on our site. So the investors are going to have basically raw data to analyze themselves, but also we do some analysis within the listing itself. So you can see, is it trending up? Is it trending down? Is it flat? What are the sources of income? What countries are really popular? So that sort of data has become better over time, and is what our investors use to evaluate these types of catalogs and assets.
So it's not prospective business or what similar artists are doing as to continuing streams. There's not a kind of on the prospect side.
No.
So an artist is selling essentially a time period too?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So that it's this song's rights of what's been played and collectible for X period of time and not 10 years in the future?
Oh, I see what you mean. So generally, the way we structure the deals is it is for the life of the copyright.
Okay.
But we're quite flexible when it comes to how we can slice those up. So I'll give you an example. So we had a songwriter reach out to us who had written a pretty, or I guess he's the son of a songwriter who'd written a pretty big Barry White song. And we actually sold just 25% of the PRO writer share on that song, 25% of his share. And that was for the life of the copyright. But he still kept 75% of those future earnings. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So how do people find you on both sides?
Good question. On the both basically growth has been quite organic to date. We just started doing some sort of Facebook advertising, but a lot of people hear about us because when we work with one songwriter, they tend to tell their co-writers and collaborators about what we do and how it worked. And so, I mean, it's like 55% of our business comes from referrals and repeat customers. So it's been nice to see that because we've been able to drive pretty solid results for the rights holders that we work with, and then they tell their friends.
So you've been able to do this in multiple businesses, music and others. What is the difference with music, or is there any difference with music?
So I think it's interesting. So I think music is certainly on a growth trajectory that some other creative industries aren't. But in general, if something is a creative work and it is popular and has been popular over time, it isn't super different when it comes to a book or a song.
Is it different the type of people you work with or their concerns?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I think so. I think when it comes to, say, when we work with an independent artist, they want to fund a tour or build a studio for the band to record in one of their houses. Right. We've worked with some folks in the book publishing industry where they've wanted to sell a piece of the royalties from some of their books and then use that and put that money back into creating more work. So,
is it harder? Is the music side harder to explain to the music side, or did they get it immediately?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been a bit of a challenge explaining what we do and why we're different. I think when it comes to royalties, and this is really in music because we certainly have the most experience there. In the past, the royalty business has been shady. There's no real way to put a polite veneer on it, and there's a lot of bad actors in the space, and we're trying and disrupting that with basically taking an honest and transparent approach and building a marketplace for these types of things versus, your standard catalog broker in some music city who's just trying to flip it to a small group of buyers.
So has that caused some friction for you?
No, not really. I mean, it's taken us some time to explain what we do, but as we've been able to get great deals for the various parties that we work with, the business has grown and growth has been accelerating quite nicely.
So back a bit ago, you commented that innovation is really creating value for people. And it looks like that's what you've built this into, but also that trying to find unique solutions, I think was what was framed. What do you think is driving the innovation happening in music?
Okay, so I think
Other than all of us having computers in our hands now.
yeah, exactly. Well, I think a lot of what has been or what is and will continue to drive music is consumer demand. And so, as soon as people in whatever jurisdiction realize that they can basically get all the music or a ton of the music that's ever been recorded and pay the price of one CD per month to get it, I think that to me is revolutionary. And I think it's good as well for the industry. And I think because, they're collecting money over time for things that were one-off purchases, right? So if you think about like pre-streaming and pre-digital downloads, the big constraint was distribution, right? Like you had record stores and then Walmart, Best Buy, those organizations, and there was a limited amount of shelf space. So a lot of things that were marginal didn't get made. And now a lot of that stuff is getting made, and which is interesting and exciting because, yeah. So I think so on the consumer side, that's what's driving the change in innovation in music. On the business side, I think there is, and rightfully so, there should be a focus on finding the pennies that are falling through the cracks, right? So more efficient royalty tracking and collection, better data, having a better understanding of who wrote what, and making sure those disputes are resolved. And so I think on the back end piece is getting better insight into the data and finding those pennies that are falling through the cracks, because they certainly add up.
And I would say, interestingly enough, that another piece of the innovation is the lower cost to create, that the need for a bank up front as a label is less but more in means of getting the support, where you guys are providing another alternative on the finance side.
Yep, exactly. I think and this is true elsewhere. As soon as it gets easier and easier to create a product, then the challenge becomes, how do you let people know about it and market it, right? And so in technology more broadly, the cloud services and being able to just go to AWS and have, or WordPress even, and have a website in an hour and a half, right, means that focus and difficulty is no longer in creating at least the basics. It's always hard to create great stuff, but then the focus on the business side is, well, how do you let people know that it exists, right? And so I think what we're trying to do is bring in that alternative financing that has a lot less strings attached than a record label deal. And so, the way I think about it is, financial security in many ways creates the environment where artistic freedom can happen. And if you don't have at least some financial security, it's very hard to create and sustain that creation and have a great career.
So you have been working with a wide variety of musicians and music organizations. What have been your biggest surprises?
So biggest surprises have been how complicated and often complicated and complex the royalty space is. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a royalty statement and you're not a CPA, it can often be quite difficult to figure out what it all means without having someone explain it to you. And as part of that, it shouldn't have, but it did surprise me how many creators that we work with struggle to understand how they're making money first, and how they could make more. And so, and I don't there's ways to make it simpler and easier, but they just haven't happened yet.
On the artist side or even on the manager side?
Across the board.
Okay, interesting. So you're seeing a lot, though, and having your hands in so many different conversations. What are the next new innovations that you are either seeing coming or that you see need to come?
Yeah. So I think there's, on the B2B industry side, I think a lot of the work that's being done putting information on the blockchain, I think is really important. I think it could solve an enormous amount of problems when it comes to collecting royalties, paying royalties, ensuring the right people get the right money.
Now we've had a session on blockchain and defined it a lot, but someone may not have heard that session. Can you take 10 seconds to say what the heck blockchain is?
So so blockchain is a distributed ledger that is doesn't have a central point of failure.
What is that?
Okay. Yeah. So I would recommend that they listen to your session on the blockchain. But so imagine, okay, so think of it like this. You have let's say you have Mr. Accountant, and Mr. Accountant has a book that in that book it has every single song that was written and who wrote it, right? But there's only one guy who's got that book. And if he loses the book or if he leaves it at a bus station, whatever, right, all that information is gone. The blockchain basically allows you to distribute that ledger everywhere and have people, through computing power, decide on what is true and what isn't. And that, honestly, that was not a great explanation.
It's actually better than most on it. So basically, though, that it's essentially a combination of code and data, that there's a big distributed database that is duplicative, shared across the network about what the actual rights and value are for, let's say, that song.
Exactly right.
So you're saying that blockchain is needed or would be of great value? Because a lot of people are saying it's anything from BS to redundant to creating complications on it, but it would help your business, or that you're just seeing it would be it's a needed element?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would certainly help our business, and I think, anyone who says the blockchain would complicate royalties, that's crazy to me, because it already is really complicated. And it's complicated, and it's it doesn't work that well. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, if you think of this, right, here's an example. So if you are a composer for TV shows, right, and you write songs and you write cues and all that good stuff, and one of your shows plays in the United Kingdom, right, it's almost impossible to figure out which show was playing from your royalty statements and figure out what songs you got paid on, because just basically the work ID of that song, especially when it comes to background music on TV shows and film, just gets lost basically internationally. And if there was a blockchain for that and these rights were registered on it, it wouldn't really matter where in the world it was playing.
And also when ownership changes, so you're enacting ownership changes, that if that's happening while something is in flow, then something's got to track back otherwise to say, oh no, that money now goes to your buyer. So in many ways it would flow right into your work.
Yep.
So are there companies, and it doesn't have to be in blockchain, but are there companies, 2 or 3 companies maybe, that you're excited about, that you're seeing bringing new innovations in?
Yeah. So I think the guys at Dot Blockchain are doing really interesting work, and I think putting the metadata on the blockchain, I think, is going to be very transformative of the music industry. And I think a lot of people don't get how transformative it will be because they focus on the sexy parts of the business and not the parts that get artists paid all the time. So I think that's really interesting, and I think the work they're doing is something I'm excited about. I think Amazon actually is something to watch, and I know, in the trades it's always Apple Music, Spotify, Pandora, but I think Amazon, because of the Echo, is going to surge up to, if not the forefront, certainly into the top 3 of organizations that are playing music and getting artists paid. And I think it's interesting. It'll be really interesting to see how a voice-first interface changes how music is marketed, distributed, because it's, the eternal question, right? If you say, play Taylor Swift, what Taylor Swift song do they play? And I think figuring that out is really will be interesting to see how that plays out. And I think the home speaker, connected speaker market will turn out to be pretty enormous.
Amazon's such an interesting beast. Full disclosure, I'm not an insignificant Amazon shareholder in terms of my own life, and I've been an Amazon shareholder since very early on. Yay!
Nice.
My husband thanks me profusely for that decision a long time ago. But it is interesting though, because a lot of people are meeting with Amazon trying to figure out how to get them how to market into a voice choice system. And it's a really interesting challenge if someone is saying, play me some jazz, what shows up and how that comes and how the metadata and ingesting into the system and everything else affects a voice versus visual selection method.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be really interesting. And I think too the other piece is, it for the music business, I think it has enormous potential to get older demographics onto streaming services that aren't really there right now. And so I think that'll certainly help a lot of classic rock artists on the streaming services.
Yeah.
And
only that Amazon knows what you think, want, love, live, etc., and has that information more at their fingertips than pretty much anybody except for Google and maybe Facebook.
Yeah. Okay, so I think I need to give you one more, right?
You can give me one more, and it could be Facebook, because we're sitting here in September 2017 where the news has now come out that they're making offers into the business for chunks of change to negotiate music portfolios.
Yeah. No, I mean that is really interesting. I mean, I'm not sure I'm excited about it yet, but I think it's always good when one of the large tech platforms starts paying for the music that it's using. But I guess the third company or group of companies that I'm excited about, and they're not all super new, are the digital distributors, the permissionless distributors like DistroKid, CD Baby, TuneCore, Stem, because I think it allows, when you eliminate gatekeepers and drive the cost of distribution down, it allows things that could have never survived in a world where the constraint was distribution to survive and thrive. And I think that's super exciting and awesome.
So people have probably run into CD Baby. They might not have run into Stem or DistroKid. Can you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Stem is the newest one, and Stem's claim to fame is they do splits really well. So the other digital distributors, CD Baby, TuneCore, DistroKid, don't do a ton of work with splits. So if you have a band, then all the money goes into one band bank account, and you can't say, okay, the drummer gets this much, the guitarist gets that much, singer gets that much. So that's what Stem does, and that's their innovation in that. And then TuneCore and DistroKid are both digital distributors that let you get your music all over the internet. DistroKid's got some interesting new products when it comes to text message marketing your fans. So they do fairly similar things.
So before we get to last thoughts, how would someone find you guys?
Yeah, so they could find us if they just go to www.royaltyexchange.com. That's probably the best way to find us. And we're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and that's just at Royalty Exchange on all of those platforms.
Well, we've covered a lot about both you guys and the areas around you. Any last thoughts as we wrap up our conversation?
Stay tuned. we've got some interesting projects coming up that we should be able to announce publicly in the next few weeks. So people should stay tuned for that. Should be interesting.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been illuminating. I don't have that much royalties on my own work coming in still, but otherwise I would be knocking on your door, and I might be sending a few people your way. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gigi. Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Well, that wraps up this podcast. Many thanks to the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation for being our hosts of this ongoing series. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places, or you can come find us at innovation.schoolofmusic.ucla.edu. Join us again to follow the other adventures that we will be tracking down in innovating music. Thanks again.